Hello Polkadot, my name is Chris Wilson, and in this tutorial we will be going over how to implement social recovery on Polkadot. This is how I learned to stop worrying and love social recovery. First thing we're going to want to do is head on over to datahub.figment.io, click on our Polkadot protocol, because we will need our API key to complete this tutorial. And one more thing is, if you don't have your development environment set up properly for Windows, you might want to go ahead and take a look at our tutorial Docker setup for Windows. This is what I will be using to complete this tutorial. Introduction. In this tutorial, we will cover how to set up and utilize social recovery for a Polkadot proxy account. This tutorial assumes the reader has a working knowledge of JavaScript and Node JS. Although not necessary, it would help to have gone through the Polkadot Pathway, which introduces the Polkadot JS API. Social recovery does not replace a lost private key or seed phrase. It is always important to safeguard those. This feature will only allow the account owner to submit transactions on behalf of the lost account for which the private key and seed phrase is unavailable, possibly due to loss or even a temporary inability to access the account. Because this is a means by which access to your funds could become compromised, it is extremely important to pick your social recovery contacts appropriately. Make sure that anyone you select as a social recovery contact is trustworthy and likely to be available in case you need their assistance in regaining access to your lost account. Be careful in defining the expectation that when you ask them to initiate the Vouch transaction, they are able to perform this task in a reasonable amount of time, as well as communicate back when they have. Social recovery contacts should always be treated respectfully, as they ultimately decide our ability to access the account in the event we need to use this functionality. Social recovery contacts should not know each other, nor know how many total people form the recovery list to avoid any risk of collusion. At a minimum, everyone on the list needs to know what their role is and how to perform it when called upon. For the purpose of this tutorial, we will assume the role of all involved parties as a means of demonstrating the relevant code. It is up to developers to transfer this knowledge to a production environment in a responsible manner, keeping best practices and end-user security in mind. Throughout this tutorial, when ... appears in an output block, it indicates that the text has been trimmed for readability. The terminal output for running the code locally will differ slightly from the examples, so do not be overly concerned if they do not match. Setup. Performing these setup steps for the purposes of following the tutorial should not be construed as the only way to implement social recovery. This is solely intended to enable readers to reach a minimum viable product, MVP, touching on all the relevant transaction types. This tutorial has two dependencies, a .env and the @polkadot/API. So now we can open Ubuntu, and in here we are going to type mkdir, which is make directory, and we are going to put in Polkadot _SR for social recovery. You can change this to whatever you like, but this is what I'll be using for the demo. Now we can type in ls, which is list, and it should show that we have created that directory right here. Now that we know that the directory exists, we can use this really neat shortcut, code, followed by our newly created directory, Polkadot SR. Now this should open up our directory inside of Visual Studio Code. That's the first time you're opening the file. Sometimes you got to click New Terminal in order for the terminal to show up in VS Code. All right, now we are inside here. We can continue to the next step, and that's going to be mp_init_y. Now this step, cd polkadot _SR, that's change directory, the cd command, so that will move you from your root directory into the Polkadot directory if you wanted to do this all inside the terminal. I prefer to use a code editor, VS Code, and so we will do mp_init_y inside of our terminal here. So there we go. This is going to create our package.json file. Now we can np install the Polkadot API. Sometimes it takes a minute. And there we go. Now we have a package lock JSON and some node modules. We can copy and paste all 4 of the commands into a terminal. The first 3 will execute in sequence. npm init.y will output the contents of the default package.json like we went over. And np install will be on the command line, so you have to hit enter again in order to run the last step. Once the installation process is completed, we can create a .env file in the working directory. For convenience, copy and paste the template below. Read more about .env in our handy quick reference guide found here. Also remember to replace API key with your valid Data Hub API key. So what I like to do first, before making a .env file, is to make a .getignore. And this file is going to tell Git to ignore whatever I put inside here. So what I'm going to put, and then make sure you save it, make that white dot go away. And now when we commit this, getignore will ignore the env file. And inside the env file, or environmental file, is where we're going to keep all of our sensitive information that we don't want anyone to have. So now that we have our getignore in place, we can do the environmental file, which is going to be these contents right here. And then we can go ahead and save it. And remember, we want to change API key here at the end to our API key. So we'll go over to Data Hub, copy our API key, and never share this with anybody. That's like giving away the keys to your castle. So there we go, put that in there and save. Now I'm only showing mine for demo purposes. So once we've replaced the API key in our env file, we can move on to the next step, which is to create 4 accounts. Create a file called create_account.js, just like that. So we'll go ahead and copy that, and we can go here to create a file, v, enter, and now we need some contents for that file. And save. So now in the terminal window, we can run node create_account.js 4 times in order to generate the data we require. Then we can copy and paste the mnemonic and the addresses for each new account into the supplied.env template. Alice, the account which we will lose access to, Alice Proxy, used to make transactions on behalf of the lost Alice account, and Bob and Charlie. These accounts represent individuals who will vouch for our ownership of the Alice account. So let's go ahead and do that now. And just a quick point of reference, whenever you create a .js file in here, you can execute it by simply typing node and then the file type. So here we want to run the create account JS, and that will output an account. Now remember, your mnemonics don't share those with anybody. So now we're going to go into the env. We'll make this one right here is going to go ahead and be Alice. So we'll put that there, and then we will take this one and put that down here. All right, and now a cool trick is you can just hit up, and that'll be the last bit of code. You can even keep going up if you would like, and it'll keep going back, so you don't have to keep inputting it all the time. Save some time there. All right, let's keep going here. All right, and then, like I said before, up arrow, enter, Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V. All right, and now we do it one more time for Charlie. Control C, Control V, and let's just grab that mnemonic. Control C, Control V, and Control S to save the file. Now the next step is going to be to get Alice some funding to afford the deposit fees by going to our faucet and entering the first address that we created. So we can go to the Alice one, and this is the address. We'll just go ahead and copy that, put it in there, send the request, and now we have funds. So now we got the funds from the faucet, and we can see here that we configured the recovery. Alice loses the seed phrase, which is a no bueno, and then we will initiate the recovery. Friends will vouch, we'll claim the recovery, and transfer as recovered. Now we want to add a proxy account for Alice. So we'll create a file called create_proxy.js. Hit enter, and now we need the guts of that bit. We can get that there. Save that file. So if we're looking at the code, delay is the announcement period required of the initial proxy request. This will generally be 0. Proxy type. This will be staking, as the other types of proxies are not sufficient for our purposes. You can learn more about the account structure and the various proxy types on the Polkadot wiki. Amount to send is equal to the full 12 decimal number representing the amount. Add proxy requires a deposit in the native currency, i.e. WND or DOT, to pay for the necessary storage space on chain. The API bit is the base amount of the currency that must be reserved when creating a proxy list. For every additional proxy added to the list, an amount defined by the API consists proxy deposit factor is reserved as well. Transfer takes a destination address and the amount. We are sending enough when the proxy account so that it can afford the deposit to initiate and the recovery attempt. We add a tip to the validator when sending multiple non-batch transactions. This is to avoid one of them being assigned a priority too low to be executed. We can run the code with node create_JS. All right, and it did look like that. That's what we're looking for. Now we can move on to fund Bob and Charlie. So now we can create a file called fun_friends.js. Go ahead and copy that and create one like we've been doing. And then we can go ahead and grab the code for that. Throw it in there and hit it with a save. This is an example of how simple it is to batch transactions with Polkadot JS. All we have done here is define an array of transfers, which will then be automatically processed, signed, and sent to the network with just a couple of method calls. Go ahead and run the code in the terminal with node fundFriends.js. Hit enter. Awesome. And we can check to make sure that went through by following the link. And that's what we like to see. Awesome. All right, on to the next step. And that's exactly what we had out. The submitted values are the hash data for the transfer function we will set in the transactions array, which will be processed by the batch function. Check the link to Subscan to view the successful transaction, which we just did. At this point, we are set up and should have a funded main account with a reserved balance of just over 1 West End or WND, a functioning proxy account, and 2 separate accounts with 0.5 WND each. The next step is to create a recovery configuration. Create a recovery configuration. This step must be completed before a seed phrase is lost. And we can see what this would look like, where Bob and Charlie are going to create the recovery, friends threshold delay. Alice will sign and send through a proxy account, and then the recovery will be configured. Creating a recovery configuration in storage requires a deposit to be paid. The base amount is fixed, with an additional deposit fee based on the number of friends we set up to be in our social recovery contacts. Let's create a file called createrecovery.js. And then we can grab the code for that file, hit it with a save. And here we'll see that threshold is the number of individual vouch transactions required for social recovery to be triggered. Delay period is the number of blocks required to pass after a recovery attempt is started before the recovery configuration can be claimed. Deposit base and deposit factor are the values from api.const.recovery, with which inform us of the amount to be set as a reserved balance. Recovery configs require deposits in the native currency, i.e. West End or DOT, in order to be created. The deposit is required because we are adding data to the storage space on-chain, which must be replicated across every peer in the network. Friends is an array containing the addresses of our social recovery contacts. They need to be stored, and this array cannot contain any duplicates. There is an API const.recovery.maxFriends, which limits the number of addresses. It's set to 9. Now we can run node createRecovery JS in our terminal. All right, look at that. And again, we can check by following the link to the West End subscan. And it was a success. Yay! Our output did look like that. Be aware, and our output did look like that. Be aware that we may encounter an error, 1010, invalid transaction, if there is not a sufficient balance in the Alice account to pay the deposit and network fees. We need a minimum of around 6 WND available balance, which we should have after visiting the faucet during setup. At this point, we have the option to either remove the recovery store to regain the deposit amount with RemoveRecovery, or start the recovery process by calling initiateRecovery. Initiate recovery from the proxy account. This looks like Alice initiates the recovery. That's the recovery initiated. Proxy account will sign and send. So now we can create a file, initiateRecovery.js. Throw that in there. InitiateRecovery.js. And then we can grab the code to put inside there. And hit it with a save. Now just go over this code real quickly. Initiate recovery creates an active recovery request in storage, which then needs to be vouched for by our social recovery contacts. The API const recovery deposit amount will be automatically reserved from the available balance of the Alice proxy account. This is why we transferred 5.2 West Ends to the Alice proxy during setup. If the recovery deposit amount is not available on the proxy, this step will fail. If close recovery is called at this stage, the active recovery request will be removed, also refunding the recovery deposit to the recoverable account, Alice. After initiate recovery has been called, it is possible to use close recovery to prematurely end the recovery process without completing it. Once close recovery has been called on all active recovery configurations, it is possible to call RemoveRecovery. This will delete the recovery configuration from storage. This is a useful case where it is necessary to alter the list of social recovery contacts, and there is no means of updating the list in place. Now we can run the code by entering node initiateRecovery.js into our terminal. All right, so now we can follow the link like we did before. And we can see that that was a success. Awesome. That's exactly what we wanted to see. And this is pretty much what our output looked like. The way to be sure it has completed successfully is to follow the link to the Subscan Block Explorer like I showed you. And now we can move on to Vouch for recovery. Vouching looks a lot like this. Vouch recovery. And then Bob will sign and send, and that'll be friends vouched. It'll happen with all, if you had more than 2, it would look even bigger. But there you go. So in order to start vouching for recovery, we're going to have a Vouch Recovery JS file. And we can do that by adding that there. Then we're going to come in here and grab the code and add it to our file, and then hit it with a save. Once these transactions are successful, the Alice proxy account will be able to claim the recovery configuration from storage, which grants authority to sign on behalf of Alice. Without this part of the process, social recovery is impossible. This is why it is of vital importance to maintain a good relationship with the people we select to be our social recovery contacts. We can run the code with node VouchRecovery.js. All right, and see we have Bob's vouch and Charlie's vouch. So we can go ahead and check those out. Success. And Charlie. How did you do, Charlie? Success. In a live scenario involving accounts with actual value, dot instead of West End, these functions would be called by separate individuals at different times. It would therefore be preferable, although not entirely necessary, to communicate with our social recovery contacts in real time to coordinate this process. Claim a recovery configuration. For claiming a recovery configuration, we have the claim recovery account address. Alice, through proxy account, will sign and send, and the recovery will be claimed. So we'll do what we've been doing here and create a claimRecovery.js file. And then we can add the code to it and hit it with a save. It is important to note that claim recovery will fail if it is called before the threshold of vouch recovery functions have been successful. We must wait for confirmation from our social recovery contacts that they have done their part before proceeding to claim the recovery configuration. Once we are aware that the vouch transactions are complete, we can run claimRecovery.js in our terminal. And as always, we can follow the link to see if it was a success. Success, yes. That's what we like to see. And the output did look like that, and we followed the link. So now that brings us to send transactions as the recovered account. And we can see that as recovered, well, the bond extra amount is going to the as recovered. Alice is using proxy account to sign and send, and the transaction will be a success. So now we can create a file called useRecovery.js. And then we can add the code snippet to that file, and then hit it with a save. After recovery configuration has been claimed, we are able to send function calls on behalf of our lost account using asRecovered. This grants authority for a limited set of functions, which includes transfers. There is also a cancel recovered function, which revokes the ability of a registered proxy account to use asRecovered, as well as a setRecovered function, which allows a root account to bypass the recovery process and grant authority for asRecovered directly. For the truly adventurous, more information on those functions can be found inside the definition files on the Polkadot API. So now let's run the code with node useRecovery.js. And we can run the code. All right, and again, we have a West End link we can follow. Yay, it was a success. Cleanup with RemoveRecovery. We can do that by creating a file called RemoveRecovery JS. Click there, hit paste that in there, hit enter, and now we can grab the code snippet, add that in there, hit it with a save. We will clean up the recovery configuration by first calling close recovery and then remove recovery. This will refund the deposit we placed earlier to Alice, then send the West End tokens back to the Figment faucet so that we are not unnecessarily tying up tokens. It must be understood that remove recovery can only be called once close recovery has been called on any active recovery requests. Regarding sign and send, Alice nonce -1, when sending multiple API calls signed by the same account, we must set the nonce directly to avoid an error about transaction priority. Before running this code, check the available balance of the Alice account on Subscan. After the recovery deposit and the recovery configuration deposit have been recouped, there should be approximately 11 to 12 West End available to return to the faucet. If the reserved balance of Alice is above the 1 West End required for the Proxy account, then the other deposits have not been processed. We would therefore need to alter amount to send so that the transfer is successful. We only need to return the available balance for our Alice account when we are done with the tutorial. If further testing of social recovery is necessary, do not proceed with this step. So now we can run node RemoveRecovery JS. And there we are. And as always, we can follow the links. Success. And I believe we had another one. We did. Follow that link. Success. All right. The events for successful removal of the recovery configuration and refund of the deposits to the Alice account will look similar to this subscan. Congratulations! In this tutorial, we learned how to configure social recovery on Polkadot using functions like create recovery, as well as transferring the associated deposit fees. We learned how to use the format balance helper function to display readable amounts. We covered how to create a staking type proxy account, as well as batching multiple transactions. We are now empowered to protect important assets on Polkadot with an additional layer of security that involves our friends. How cool is that? As always, if you had any trouble following this tutorial or simply want to discuss Polkadot, our Data Hub tech, you can join our Discord in the link down below. I look forward to seeing you there, and until next time, happy coding.